We live on the cutting edge of physics, materials science, engineering, and nanotechnology. Because at Lockheed Martin, we're engineering a better tomorrow.
All right, so if you could make anything, what would you make? That is the question that I want all of you to think about while I'm speaking. So the maker movement has brought some pretty incredible stuff into our homes. The 3D printer, it's not a new thing. 3D printers have been around for about 30 years. But what's cool about 3D printers is, number one, they're super low cost now, they're super accessible. And number two, people are doing all sorts of fun things with them. So in our futures, in your lifetimes, the things that we'll be able to make with 3D printers will be things that we can't imagine today. But also, the software that we use. It's one thing to have a 3D printer, but how do you get the idea from your head into the printer to create the object? You need software, you need tools. Those tools are evolving at an incredibly rapid pace. You can get stuff today for free that let you imagine anything and turn it into a digital file that you can share with your friends, you can share with manufacturing facilities so they can actually build your parts. And you can also get computers for 35 bucks. So 10 years ago, this was completely unheard of. There's a project at the MIT Media Lab called One Laptop Per Child. And the entire goal of a fairly sizable research team with a lot of investment was to make a $100 laptop to give access to computers to kids around the world. But today, you can just go down the street to a Radio Shack and buy for $35 the same thing. In addition to that, we have tools that let you make electronics at your desk. Go ahead and play that video. So, in just a few moments, I can imagine an idea, I can create the design files for it, I can 3D print the mechanical pieces, and I can get all the electronics fabricated quickly. And I can put all those things together and have a new object, a new robotic arm, a new implantable artificial heart, a new airplane design. This is all super cool and super exciting to me. So the question is, where will our imagination take us? Where will your imagination take us? We're going to come back to this question at the end of my presentation. But first, I want to talk about me. Because that's why I'm here, right? No, I want to talk about my path and my story and how I got to where I am, and some of the things I'm interested in, some of the things I'm working on. And it's interesting to follow Dr. Ling because my career has involved a bunch of strange steps. And the first step was I studied biomedical engineering because I wanted to do, and we didn't plan this, but I wanted to make prosthetic limbs. And it turns out that at the Media Lab, my mentor, Dr. Hugh Hare, is a double amputee whose sole research career has been focused on giving himself legs that allow him to walk again. So I'm honored to be able to be mentored by somebody whose work has so profoundly influenced what I've been interested in. But like I said, my life has taken some interesting twists and turns. And this was one of them. So right after college, I took a break from graduate school and actually haven't gone back to graduate school, never finished, got my master's, and then became a toy inventor. And I became a toy inventor because there was a company that was down the street from me, and they were making really cool medical devices. And I thought, hey, I don't want to keep studying medical devices. I want to spend a couple of years learning how to make medical devices. So I took a break, I joined this company, and as soon as I started working at this company to make medical devices, they said, yeah, we decided we're going to stop making medical devices and make toys instead. But you're a biomedical engineer, and you do robotics, and you're interested in all this cool electronics, so maybe you can make electronics for our toys. And not only did I make the electronics, but I made the mechanical bits, I did the sound, I did all the fabrication. So I was building toys from the ground up. And things like, if you've ever played Totally Twister, I invented that. I doubt any of you have played it. This was a product that I made that was sold by Hasbro. It was a great product. It was really fun to build, but it didn't really sell that well. There were a lot of products that we designed, over about 1,000 products in a 10-year period. Most of them didn't see the light of day. And that was fairly frustrating to me. There were a couple things that I really enjoyed that I thought were fun, like this. Go ahead and play that video. There might be some sound here. It's okay if you don't get the sound, but I won't sing along to what is about to happen. But you can imagine Maracas Dora is singing and dancing. So right now there's a soundtrack playing, and she's singing and dancing to the soundtrack. And this was the pinnacle of my work as a toy inventor. And it left me scratching my head saying, well, this is pretty cool. I've done a lot of toys, I've learned a lot. I've learned a lot about what it means to create products that humans interact with. Because going through engineering school, you study physics, you study math, you study the sciences, but you don't study people. I could build a bridge in the middle of the ocean and get an A in my structural engineering class. But that bridge is just as much of a failure as a bridge that falls down and doesn't suit the needs of people. So I got back to the question of me, the biomedical engineer, and here I am making toys. Does anyone see the similarity between the biomedical engineering and the toys? Raise your hand. Yeah, so there are some similarities. But at the end of the day, it's not what I was passionate about. I learned a lot, it was fun, it was cool for a little bit, but I had to get back to things that mattered to me. So I started a number of startups. Several of them were medical devices. One device in particular, if you ever lose a tooth because you're playing a sport and you get hit and a tooth comes out, it's a terrible thing, but engineering has provided solutions. And one of the solutions is to actually drill into the bone, stick a little titanium screw into the bone. Hopefully this isn't making anyone queasy. And you mount a new engineered tooth on top of that screw. And for most people, that works really, really well. But if you put too much force on that before the bone is healed, then the screw falls out, and now you're left without a tooth. So I developed a device with a couple colleagues that allowed you to mechanically test to know when that screw was stable, when the bone was healed, so that that tooth would work and you could eat again. And that was a pretty cool project, but still wasn't really what I wanted to be doing. And after that, I got into another project, which was a hearing aid of all things. I don't have hearing loss, but I have a lot of friends and family members who do. And they were all saying, hearing aids stink. They don't work. They don't let me hear again. And part of that was because people were expecting the engineered device to return their bodies to the natural state, to fix their hearing. But we didn't have the engineering at the time to allow you to do that. So I set about to create that engineering and started a startup. And we started to build the pieces to let people hear again. And this looks mysteriously like an early Apple iPod because we stole the idea of, hey, you've got this device in your pocket that's all about sound, it's all about music. What if we could take that form factor, take that experience, and instead of just playing music, insert specialized electronics that allow us to process all of the sound from the environment, strip out all the background noise, and then push that sound up to somebody's ears. So we're basically putting replacement ears inside a little device. And the great thing about those replacement ears is that there are all sorts of things that we could connect up to them. We could connect up basic microphones, so I could have a little handheld mic that I could point at people, almost like a flashlight or a set of binoculars, you know, the audio equivalent of binoculars. I could point it at somebody way back there and actually have super powered hearing, because the microphones could filter out everything else, and I could focus on a point 20 feet away. That's super cool technology. But I could also interact with other devices. I could let this little handheld audio processor connect up to my iPod and play all the music that I want. Or connect up to my cell phone, which is that one. And one of the things that all the people with hearing loss said is, well, if I have hearing aid and I try to stick my cell phone over the hearing aid, the two devices interact with each other, I get all sorts of noise, and it makes things even worse. So trying to talk to somebody who has hearing aids or hearing loss with a cell phone was really difficult, and we were pretty much solving that problem. Also, regular telephones, televisions and computers. If you know people with hearing loss, they tend to crank up the volume on the TV. So it's quiet for them, but it's incredibly loud for you. It's incredibly loud for the neighbors. And that was another thing that was really easy to solve with this new engineered approach. So I'm going to skip over a couple things. There we go. So I spent all my life making things. I grew up, before there was a term called maker, I was making things. I like to think of myself as an engineer, not as a maker. Because engineering, there's making and engineering. You don't have to make as an engineer, but a lot of engineers do. Engineering is about understanding physics and turning that physics into the sorts of things that people want. Let's see, there we go. Slides are back, excellent. This is me as a medium-aged youth with a full-size 747 that I built out of Legos that was like 1/50th scale. It was crazy. It was bigger than me, almost. But there's another piece to the story, which is that in addition to liking to make things, I was also a semi-professional cyclist, and I played soccer just about all my life. I'm a little bit out of shape now. Actually, I'm a lot out of shape. I hate to say it. This was like 10 years ago, and I was really fast. Oh, and I know that bicycles, you're supposed to actually sit on the seat and ride them, not run alongside them, but this is a special sport called cyclocross. It's a lot of fun. And the reason I bring that up is because of this. So I want you to all join me in a little experiment. You've been sitting for the last 40 minutes. I want all of you to stand up. And now, jog in place. We're going to do this for like 30 seconds, okay? Everybody's jogging. I'm shaking the podium. I'm going to jog a little less, but you should jog more. Keep jogging. All right. 10 more seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, stop. How many of you feel warm? Warmer than you did on the inside. You're like, I need to take my coat off now. Okay, go ahead and sit down. So I counted the number of people in the room. Right then, you were, as a group, generating about the equivalent of 150 horsepower. So if you think about that in heat terms, the combined total output of all of your bodies was generating as much heat, about 120,000 watts. So each of your bodies, when you're sitting, will put out about the equivalent of a 60-watt light bulb worth of heat. And your body just pushes that heat out. And if you don't generate heat on a cold day, we're warm-blooded animals. We have to regulate our temperature. So our bodies are very, very good at regulating the temperature high or low. When it's colder outside, you start to shiver. When it's hot outside, you start to sweat. But in a lot of circumstances, you need things like clothes to keep warm because your bodies don't generate enough heat. More heat goes out to the environment if you have less clothes on. So in circumstances when it's too hot, what do? Well, you can't always take your clothes off, so we crank up the air conditioning. The problem was for me that our house had air conditioning, but my parents were from New Orleans, and we were living in Philadelphia. So a hot day for me was like 80 degrees. I was born in New Jersey. A hot day for them was like 100 degrees for my parents. The thermostat was always set at the comfort level of my mom, which meant that I was always sweating. So I said, well, can I get an air conditioner for my bedroom? My parents were like, we have air conditioning. Why would you want an air conditioner in your bedroom? Plus, it's going to make the house look ugly. We're going to have this big box sitting in the window. That's silly. We don't want that. Secretly, I decided that I have to figure out this whole making cold thing. It's got to be, I'll make my own secret little air conditioner, and I'll put like a little vent outside the window. My parents will never know. And what's funny about this is there were no books on air conditioning that I could get at my high school library. There was no internet back then. If you think that I'm like 15 years old and I've had internet my whole life, I'm not. I'm older than that. I was alive before there was the internet. So discovering how air conditioners worked, how you make cold, was something that actually fascinated and captivated me. Because we're going to do another little experiment. Everybody put your hands together. Now start rubbing. Okay, good. Did your hands get hot? Yeah. We just made heat. It's really, really easy to make things hot. But now, make yourself cold. Can anyone make yourself cold? You can fan yourself a little bit. That generates a little bit of cooling. But can you sit and concentrate and think heat go away? The harder you concentrate, the more your brain cells are working, the more heat you generate, actually. So making cold, it's not so easy. And surprisingly, it's difficult and takes a lot more componentry, a lot more engineering than making stuff hot. So I learned, hey, if I'm going to make things cold, if I'm going to make air conditioning, I need to figure out the science of it. I need to figure out the technology of it. I need to be able to make these things myself. So I went out and I bought some books. The internet did exist at this point. So I went online and started to study how do people actually make things cold. And the funny thing about making things cold is it seems like such an insignificant thing. It's like, oh, so there's like you just go to Home Depot and you buy some product and it's an air conditioner, refrigerator, freezer. But if you think about life without cooling, that is not a life you want to live. Imagine you have no refrigerator. Imagine you get in a car on a hot day and the car is 180 degrees because of the greenhouse effect within the car. Imagine, though, worse things like we have no vaccines because we have no way to keep them chilled and stable. Half of the products that we have wouldn't be able to be manufactured. We wouldn't have paper, printed paper, because actually air conditioning was invented by Willis Carrier to keep the printing presses dehumidified in New York so that they could print on hot days. So these simple little things that we take for granted are all around us, working 24/7 to keep our bodies comfortable, to keep our lives possible. Things like living in the South. There's a great migration to the South when air conditioning happened. So I learned how to make cold. I taught myself how to work with those parts. And that's my logo. It might look familiar. And that's me making stuff. So even though I'm a biomedical engineer, my work has encompassed all fields of engineering, from the material science to the chemistry, to the thermodynamics, the mechanical engineering, the electronics, the software, the user interface design. And what was really exciting about this project, this one particular implementation of cooling, is it came full circle to medical devices. In conversations with colleagues about, okay, now I can make cold. What do? I can go and buy an air conditioner for my house because I don't live at home anymore. And I figured out how to harness this fundamental force of nature, cold. There's got to be something that nobody's done before. It's got to be something I can try that's going to make people's lives different, make people's lives better. And the answer to that was a colleague of mine who is an emergency medical physician said, hey, if you could put these in ambulances, when somebody has a heart attack or a stroke and are transporting them to the hospital, you can chill their bodies. And by doing so, you can reduce the cell death that takes place when blood stops flowing. And if you can reduce that cell death, you can cut the incidence of death by 50%. So some of the studies say. And who was very interested in that? Well, the US Air Force. When they medevac people who've had traumatic injuries in the battle zone, anything you can do to stabilize that patient, to try to elongate the time to get them to a critical care facility where they can be treated, anything you can do will save lives. So this takes me back to the MIT Media Lab and some of the work that I'm doing now. When I started at MIT, the big question that I had for myself and my colleagues had for me was, what are you going to do that's going to make the world different in 10 years? And I thought about the cooling stuff, and I thought about air conditioning. I was like, yeah, you know, we've got air conditioning all around us. This isn't an exciting problem. I mean, you saw Dr. Ling's presentation, and I saw the oohs and ahs and eyes opening when he showed this robotic arm being controlled by somebody's brain. And my mentor, his whole passion, Dr. Herr's passion was to give himself legs so that he could walk again. And being in the shadow of that, it just makes you think, I'm gonna like make air conditioners? Really? But I've actually come back around to think, wait a second. This is something that affects every single one of our lives. This is something that we take for granted and depend on every day. But this is also something that plays a very significant role in something that's changing the world. So maybe I can have an impact. Maybe I should be the one person who says, I'm going to completely disrupt HVAC. I'm going to completely disrupt how we heat and cool and control temperature and make our world comfortable. Because if I don't, global warming will get worse. If I don't do that, nobody else is. There's lots of companies that are doing things the same way they've been doing for decades. The air conditioner hasn't changed in the 100 years since Willis Carrier made the first one. And that, to me, was something worth digging into. Just a week and a half ago, the US government put out a 150-page report on the health impact of global warming. And within several decades, the prediction is tens of thousands of people in the US alone will die every single year because it's too hot, because they don't have access to cooling, to comfort, to being able to control their environment, control their climates. And John Holdren, who's at the White House and one of the chief science advisors of the White House, was quoted as saying that it will be so hot in the US that people working outside will not be able to control their temperatures, and they will die. And I read that, and it was such a stark statement. When somebody senior at the White House says, people will die because of climate change within the next few decades, that made me think, hey, now is the time to attack this problem, to see how we can completely rethink air conditioning, how we can completely rethink refrigeration. The answer is not slapping more air conditioners on the side of buildings. Because where do air conditioners get their power from? The very power plants that are generating all the CO2 in the first place. And on top of that, the chemicals used in air conditioners have a much higher global warming potential than the power plants themselves. So the more hot it gets, the more air conditioning we need, the more air conditioning we build, the more power we use, the more chemicals we put out in the atmosphere that make the world hotter. So that is a downward spiral that we need to break out of. So my goal at the Media Lab is to fix that. we can't make the problem worse like we're doing now. And frankly, I have to confess, I don't know what the solution is yet. I actually just started the Media Lab 6 months ago. I don't know what the solution is yet. I have some ideas, and I'm going to have a lot of fun, and it's going to be really exciting to work on those ideas and see where they can take us. See where my Kitty Hawk moment is, pushing that little airplane off and saying, okay, here's this cool demo. It's only going to work for 8 seconds, but it's going to change the way we think about the environments around us. So I want to leave you with this. Make things that matter. Solve your problems with exciting solutions. And make things that are interesting to you, because when you do, you will change the world. Just like Dr. Ling said, I'll leave you with the same thoughts, and I'm going to close on that. All my images are open source, by the way. That's an important thing that I like to point out, so you can find them all online. But thank you. I hope you enjoyed that, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the Science and Engineering Festival.